Tuesdays mean it's politics day around here, where we talk a little bit about common good politics and how we could get to a space in our country where our identities as voters and our identity as a person engaging in civic life is framed and rooted around the common good. We especially like to have this conversation with and for faith voters. So if that fits your category, we're talking to you. If that's not your category, listen to us talk to those people. It might be good for all of us. On this daily podcast, I like to remind you where I am. My name is Doug. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And again, standing up at my stand-up desk. And a little note from yesterday, those of you that follow the daily podcast, I have now concluded my 5-day juice diet, and I am now full of food from breakfast this morning. So, boy, I feel great. What a difference. What a difference eating can make to a person's countenance. So we're going to talk about politics today. We'd love to know where you're coming from, where you are, what you're doing. We have a special guest. Robb will tell us about our special guest that we interviewed, and we're going to play that interview for you here. But we also want to know who you are, what you're doing, and where you are, because in this podcast, it's about you and it's about all of us finding a way to have an open-eyed, positive view of the world while we take in all the realities and find a way to let our own light shine in this world that we find ourselves in. We're going to start with a couple of notes here. Look, it was another difficult day in this country yesterday, in which the realization of gun violence and violence in our society and violence toward one another has become evident to all of us. And it's with deep hearts and deep sadness for the people who were murdered, for the people's families, for the murderer and the murderer's family. It's just a horrible way for human beings to engage and to live. And it's with deep, deep sorrow that we need to find a pathway forward for all of us. So we feel that pain. We'll be doing some conversations more specifically about gun violence and about what we can do about violence on one another, and especially that done with guns and these kinds of shootings. But that's not our conversation today, but we do want to note that that's a significant thing for this day. Hey, Robb, before I introduce you, I just also want to mention why I'm wearing my Biden-Harris shirt today. As I said before we got started here, I slept in it, so I just kept it on because that's COVID life. So I'm technically wearing my pajamas for this. But the reason I own the shirt, I didn't actually own a Biden-Harris shirt during the campaign, but I did feel that I needed to get it when Robb, you and I went to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. And the inauguration, of course, was 14 days after the Trump-led insurrection and act of sedition against the government. And we knew that there was going to be a lot of attention around this, and we wanted to be there for the inauguration. But I also wanted to wear something that would identify that as a, tall, middle-aged white male. I was not with the insurrectionists. I wanted to be very clear. I'm with her. I've got my Harris shirt on. And so that's why I own a shirt like this. And thought for Politics Day, it's still sort of a fun shirt to wear. So I thought I'd wear it today. So anyway, that's where I'm coming from and why I'm wearing what I'm wearing. Robb is our co-host on Tuesdays, as well as occasionally some other days on our political side. And Good morning, Robb.
Good morning, Doug. Good to see you. I don't have anything interesting to report about the clothes that I'm wearing today, but I'm coming to you from Fayetteville, Arkansas. I too have eaten food today, so just those updates for folks that might be interested in these kinds of details about our lives. Listen, one of the things we are endeavoring to do on the politics podcast here on the Vote Common Good Network is to spend some time having conversations with leaders who are having a dramatic influence on our political situation, the policies that get passed, the laws that get made, the things that don't get done, and people that have a real clear insight. Because we can all be kind of talking heads and pundits about this stuff, but I think it's really beneficial when we go to primary sources, when we learn directly from the people involved what's going on and what's happening. And so I'm really excited today that we have the opportunity to share with everyone a conversation we had with Congressman Ted Liu. Congressman Liu is the congressman from California's 33rd congressional district. He has been a significant leader in the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. He is a part of the Democratic leadership and elected by his colleagues to do so. He He was one of the impeachment managers who tried the case against Donald Trump in front of the U.S. Senate. So just that tremendously important situation. He was entrusted by his colleagues to be their representative to the Senate, and he also is in what I try to get him to talk about this a little bit, and he kind of resists it during the conversation. But he's also on the short list to become California's next Attorney General, and certainly there's a lot of speculation about that. So Ted Liu is a really interesting person, tremendously important figure in Washington, D.C., but also a tremendously humble guy. So he's not out there kind of making a name for himself. And it's for that reason that we like him a lot. And we're really thrilled to talk with him about what happened on January 6th, what's going to happen in the future as a result of that, what the legislative priorities are for the Democrats going forward, and a whole host of other things, including our mutual love for the Cleveland Browns. So with no further ado, here is the conversation that Doug and I had with Ted Liu late last week, and we want to share it with you now. Ted, I've been looking forward to chatting with you just so I could say, how about our Cleveland Browns, huh?
Oh, I'm so excited.
I
tell people our 20-year rebuilding plan is finally showing signs of progress.
Yep. It's my wife always makes fun of me when she says, the off season is the most optimistic time of the year for Browns fans, but not this time around.
That's right. Yeah. Where do you live now?
I live in Arkansas now.
Got it. Okay. And Doug, where are you?
I'm in Minneapolis.
All right. Very nice.
Yeah. And you sounds like you're at home, or are you in DC?
I'm in Torrance, Southern California.
Okay. So Ted, here's what I wanted to start with. How are things for you and for the other Congress people in light of the insurrection, of course, but also this idea that so much has shifted from COVID, and this historic election happened, which you must feel great about, and then you also had to manage impeachment. So I'm just sort of wondering, overall, there's probably never been a time that has felt as chaotic and as different for what a representative's asked to do than this period that we're living in right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug, for your question. I find it very troubling that we've had to extend the National Guard presence at the U.S. Capitol, and we don't have to spend taxpayers' money deploying federal troops to now have to guard our Capitol against ourselves. What I would like to see is for Republicans to say one simple, truthful sentence, which is the election was not stolen. If they would just say that, then we wouldn't have to spend federal taxpayers' money to deploy troops to guard our own Capitol right now.
So Rob and I were there for around inauguration time, and we saw how formidable that presence is with the fencing that went out for blocks, and just what a different feel that is from somebody who's been at the Capitol a number of times and how open it was. What does it feel like now when you're there, or when staffers are there and other people are making their way around, trying to do their jobs and trying to engage, life at the Capitol? How is it feeling here in, mid-March?
So I'm up two minds. It feels disappointing to have all this security. At the same time, it is extremely hopeful that we do now have a new administration, and we recently passed the American Rescue Plan, which is going to help America on our path to recovery by getting shots into people's arms, cash into people's pockets, kids in schools, and people into jobs.
Yeah, it's really incredible, honestly, what you all have done in less than 50 or 60 days here of this new Congress, to put these bills together, to make all of that happen, to have to work in the midst of COVID, to articulate as well as I think the House did and the administration is doing on the benefits of this rescue plan. And there was all this other stuff going on that you were one of the people that had to oversee the work in the in the impeachment. Does this show that there's a little new attitude with this Congress, that this because of control of the Senate and this new administration, that there's a like get stuff done kind of attitude? Because that's what it feels like to somebody in Minneapolis is, man, this doesn't feel like the last 4 years. In some ways, like maybe not even like the last 8 years. It feels very aggressive and efficient, and makes me feel good about the federal government. Do you feel that same way?
I do. For the last 4 years, we've had incompetence from the former administration, and then sometimes it was maliciousness in addition to incompetence. Now, with this new administration, with Democratic control of the House as well as the Senate, you're actually seeing government working again. So we've passed American Rescue Plan. We're getting stimulus checks out to American people. We're having vaccine rollout and distribution at record levels. And we're also making sure that our local cities and school districts and states have the money they need to be able to operate as well. Schools are starting to reopen. So it's very hopeful. And what you're seeing is what competent government now can do for the American people.
Yeah. Ted, let's talk about that maliciousness of the previous administration a little bit. As much as we would all love to never talk about Donald Trump again. I mean, you were one of the impeachment managers who, essentially tried the case against Donald Trump in the U.S. Senate and won a majority of votes, not enough to convict him, but one major case well enough that a majority of senators voted in favor of your case. I'm curious now, after a bit of time since the impeachment, given your role as an impeachment manager, how do you reflect back on that? What are you thinking about what took place during the impeachment trial of former President Trump?
It's funny that you asked that. I was thinking the other day about some of the actions I took on January 6th, which in hindsight seemed pretty odd. And what stress can do for you. So I remember when the Capitol Police officer told us to evacuate. I was in my office on the 4th floor of the Cannon House office building. And so we raced down 5 flights of stairs and went to the next office building that the Capitol Police said was safe. And when I realized that a mob was descending on Capitol Hill, it actually made me think about my government class and what I learned in government in high school. So I actually called my high school teacher from my government class, who I hadn't spoken to for over 3 decades, and we had a lovely conversation. And in hindsight, so I just thought, well, that's a strange thing to do with a mob coming, being on lockdown. That's something I would do, but I ended up doing that. And at the same time, we also started drafting the article of impeachment while on lockdown. And that article of impeachment got the most bipartisan number of votes in U.S. history for impeachment, and also the most bipartisan number of votes for conviction. And in any other context, a vote of 57 to 43 would not be close. So I think for the history books, it's very clear that we proved Donald Trump incited an insurrection.
Yeah. So what happens now in terms of holding former President Trump accountable? Certainly, I think we're all aware of different investigations that are taking place on the state level in New York, maybe in Georgia. There's, been conversations about that. But is there any recourse left to hold President Trump accountable for his actions, from the perspective of the federal government?
If you listen to Mitch McConnell's speech after the impeachment trial, it was quite extraordinary. He basically said that the impeachment managers proved our case, that Donald Trump incited the insurrection, that there was no question about that. And then he said he's going to not vote, or he didn't vote to convict because he believed the Senate didn't have jurisdiction. But he said that the criminal justice system can hold Donald Trump accountable. So Mitch McConnell was basically 2 steps away from saying lock him up. It was a pretty extraordinary speech. So we do now have both the civil and criminal court systems that are available to hold anyone accountable, including a former president, for violating the law.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally am one of those people that I'm not ready to move on from January 6th. What happened that day was so extraordinary and so troubling that, like, this isn't just something we move on from. Like, there's got to be consequences for this. There's got to be some standard of justice that gets meted out as a result of this. You can't just retire to your resort and live the rest of your life, can you? I mean, that doesn't seem like an appropriate response.
That's a great point. This was an insurrection against our own government. Multiple people died. These were domestic terrorists that invaded the Capitol. And we want to have a 9/11 style commission to look at what happened and how we can make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Unfortunately, Republicans are blocking it because they don't want to talk about this. They want to move on, act as if this hadn't happened. And that's why there's a holdup with this bipartisan commission. Hopefully we can still do it. But if Republicans are not going to agree to it, then we're going to simply have the committees in the House of Representatives start doing hearings so we can get to the bottom of exactly what happened and how we can make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, Ted, I'm so glad that that's happening, and I've been encouraged to hear that something's gonna move forward. I will say that on the non-governmental side, a lot of us have also been looking at sort of what happened and seeing where our role as citizens can come into play. And as you know, with the work we do at Vote Common Good is trying to reach these faith voters, Christian faith voters specifically, to try to get them to make the common good the voting criteria and consider voting for Democrats. One of the things that we've learned and saw out of all the reports and the film footage from that insurrection was how deeply embedded the Christian nationalism narrative was in supporting, organizing, calling people to action, and then when people broke into the Senate dais, tried to christen that with a Christian prayer. And some of the work that we're doing at Vote Common Good is to try to raise this issue with our citizenry, right? There's a sense in which this government of the people and for the people, we all have to take responsibility as well. So we're doing a lot of work in our own communities to say to faith leaders, you can't forget about this. And there's an accountability that needs to happen inside of our own faith communities to people who are going to claim our own faith. And I'm just wondering if that piece of the story is something that people who are in your role as a congressman and other people that are thinking about this from the representative side, are you hearing about any of that, the role that Christian nationalism played in the insurrection and the importance of it?
So thank you for that question and for the great work that Vote Common Good does. I happen to be Catholic. I'm very proud that the President of the United States is Catholic. And many of the statements that President Biden has made does resonate with me as a Catholic and as a Christian. I don't really understand why, if you're a follower of Christ and you read the Gospels, how that would lead you to attack the U.S. Capitol. It completely befuddles me. I don't understand this kind of Christian nationalism. It doesn't make sense to me. It's certainly not how I think an objective person would interpret the Bible. And I've read a number of troubling stories and reports about this strain of Christian nationalism and some of the things that some of these folks have said who did attack the Capitol. And it just mystifies me because it seems the furthest thing I can think of in what Christ taught, which was all about love and peace.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have another example of this kind of intersection of racism, nationalism, maybe spurred on by, kind of fringe beliefs and even encouragement from the former president for, towards inciting people towards violence with the shooting that happened in Atlanta. And I'm curious if you're making any connections between the insurrection on January 6th and this really, tragic shooting that took place in Atlanta.
What we do know is that the former president did use racist phrases like Kung Flu in describing the coronavirus, and that fueled hatred towards the Asian American community. We saw a spike in hate crimes against the Asian American community since the pandemic started. The nonprofit Stop AAPI Hate has now tracked approximately 3,800 hate incidents since March of last year. And we know that in 16 major cities across America, this accounts for nearly 150% increase in hate crimes against the Asian American community. Now, when you look at what happened in Atlanta to an Asian American business and shot 4 employees, he then drove 27 miles to another Asian American business. And then he went to a third Asian American business. 6 of 8 victims happen to be Asian. And when I look at it, that to me, prima facie, looks like it was racially motivated. So it's still early in the investigation. They still have to find out what happened. But it's not as if this murderer went to, an adult bookstore or adult movie theater or a, random strip club. He specifically targeted Asian businesses.
Yeah. It's really, it's a really dangerous combination when we've got racism, what's often called kind of purity culture within the Christian church, which is, real strict rules about sexuality, and then kind of the gasoline thrown on that by Donald Trump and different conspiracy theorists. It just is a really dangerous combination. It's a recipe for tragedy, and I think that's what we've seen in Atlanta, and hopefully that will be the last of it. I think we all pray for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, Ted, we met 2.5 years ago, I think, when we were doing our work to try to be sure that the House of Representatives in the 2018 election was put in the hands of Democrats to try to restrain the Trump administration. And we're going to be doing that work again in 2022. And I'm sort of wondering how you're feeling about what are often referred to as these midterm elections, but I'm reminded by people who run for Congress, like, it's not a mid anything, it's an election. Like, the midterm election is just a real election, right? It might be in the middle of a presidential term, but it's every Congress person is up for re-election. And we're going to be doing work in that area and trying to travel the country and be sure that voters are able to think about their vote with more freedom than they sometimes are allowed to because of their religious identity. So we're going to do that work. But I wonder what you're thinking about how the election is shaping up for 2022. The control of the House is something that I worry about. Robb has talked a lot about this in our podcast, about how big of shifts there can be in these away from the party that's in the presidency during these elections right after the presidential election. I'm guessing you're going to be running. Love to support you, but who else are you excited about, and how are you feeling overall about how things are shaping up for 2022, and what can people who are listening to this podcast know and do to be engaged, to be sure that Democrats keep control of the House of Representatives?
Well, folks should know it's very close margins in both the Senate and the House. And so this is going to be a battle in 2022. I believe that governing is messaging. And so the American people are going to want to know, well, what did we do these last 2 years? And I think we're off to a great start with the American Rescue Plan. That's going to really put America back on the road to recovery and get vaccines out to the American people. It's going to reopen schools. It's going to get cash into people's pockets. It's going to get people jobs and prevent layoffs and help small businesses. And we're going to be talking about all those benefits to American people from now till 2022 and asking a very simple question. Is your life better now, or was it better 2 years ago? And I think if we do this right, the majority of American people will say, yeah, their life was better under Democratic control for the last 2 years. And we're hopeful we can deliver that message. And we're now going to pass additional hopefully laws that can help people. We're working on a major infrastructure package to create more good jobs. We also want to make sure that people, for example, don't get guns that they shouldn't get, with having background checks that can apply to everyone. And so there's a number of issues we're going to continue working on.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I feel, Ted, like I need you to talk me off the ledge, because I'm one of those people that's just terrified of 2022, given the history of how many seats the party out of power typically gets, and then when you couple that with the former president starting a PAC to support candidates that are in line with his vision for America. It's not just that Republicans could retake the House, it's these kinds of Republicans could retake the House. And that's terrifying to me. And so, talk me off the ledge. Give me a little hope that this isn't what we're looking for, what we're looking forward to.
It's clear that when Donald Trump is on the ballot, he drives increases in turnout, both among Republicans as well as Democrats. When he's not on the ballot, that turnout doesn't happen on the Republican side. And if you saw it happen in 2018, Democrats flipped the House. One reason is because of just turnout. Not as many Republican voters turned out. If that happens again in 2022, Democrats will do well. And right now, President Biden is immensely popular. He's been trying to unify the country. He was out front and telling the American people he wants to pass his American Rescue Plan, and he signed it into law. And if in 2022, the economy is doing well, the pandemic is under control, I think Democrats have a very good chance of holding both the Senate and the House.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things, but I'm curious about, now that the American Rescue Plan is passed, and what are the legislative priorities now that are before you? What are the big things that you're working on? You mentioned infrastructure, you mentioned background checks, but I'm curious about, what are the big, ambitious, bold ideas that can make a difference in people's lives, that will help them to see that when Democrats are running the government, things are in better shape?
We also passed H.R. 1, which is legislation that would protect voting rights, cut down on corruption, and have significant campaign finance reform. We need to get that into law, because what we're seeing now are state Republican legislatures trying to take away voting rights and trying to restrict voting. And what that shows me is you have one party, the Republicans, who believe they can't win on their ideas. So now what they're trying to do is to restrict the kinds of folks who will be able to vote. And eventually, that's not a sustainable party. You can't win as a party if your path to victory depends on voter suppression. So ultimately, Democrats are going to win this in the long run. But in the short term, we do need to get H.R. 1 through, so that we stop all these efforts to curtail voting rights.
Mm-hmm. Does that look positive in the Senate?
It largely depends on two senators. If all the Democrats agree to change the filibuster rules for H.R. 1 for voting type bills, then it will pass. But right now, it's going to be filibustered unless the filibuster is changed.
Hmm. Yeah. Ted, what's the well, Doug, you got a question?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to take it in another direction. Were you going to follow up?
Yeah, I was going to go in another direction too, but you go ahead.
To this idea that, if Democrats hold together, the thing I've appreciated about the Democratic coalition, the Democratic Party, it's a wide range, and it's a wily bunch over there, right? There's a lot of versions of what it means to be a Democrat. How is that feeling in the House? What's the overall sense? I've been very encouraged in these first 60 days or so that the Democratic coalition is held together, and that the differences that exist across the spectrum are certainly people are aware of them, and different representatives have their own viewpoints. But there's been a sense that people have been pulling on the rope at the same time. Does it feel like that's going to hold together? Do you have a sense for us? Can you give us a little insider scoop on what the Democratic vibe is within the House?
We've been very unified so far. If you look at the American Rescue Plan, every Democratic senator voted for it. And in the House, every Democratic member of the House voted for it, with the exception of one person. That is amazing unity. And if you see many of the other bills we pass, they've largely passed with full-on Democratic support, or if we lose some Democratic members of Congress, it's only a small handful. And a number of these bills also do have bipartisan support, such as background checks. And so I think there's a real shot at getting some of these important bills into law. And currently we have remained very unified as Democrats in both the House as well as the Senate.
And is that happening because Nancy Pelosi and other leadership is doing something different, or is that happening because there's a sense within members that, like, okay, we're going to deal with our differences later, we're going to deal with the things that we can come around on now? Or what? Like, why does it feel so fresh that Democrats are staying together? What's behind that?
So, well, one reason is it is not typical to have one party control the House, the Senate, the White House. In fact, when this happened, when Republicans controlled the House, Senate, and White House, Paul Ryan described it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity at that time. So now you see the other party, this time the Democrats, with that control. And so we all realize that we now need to govern, because if we can't get things through, then we have no one to blame but ourselves, because we do control the House, the Senate, and the White House. So that's why I think everyone's trying to work together to pass laws to help the American people. Number one, because we can. And number two, because we realize that's why we're in office. We're here to try to help people. And we're all working very hard to do exactly that.
Yeah. That's
well,
great to hear.
I've been hearing more of that from Democrats, actually. Not that anyone who runs for office doesn't run, under the auspices that they're going to help people. Of course, I mean, that's why people do it. But they don't always say it as much as I've been hearing it lately. Like, we can help people. We should help people. We will help people. Is that just kind of coming out because people believe it? Or is that, are you all talking about that together as something that you do want to remind one another of, but you also want to say out loud to others? Is it part of intentional messaging, or is it just the sense that the significance of this moment is being recognized?
I think it's a recognition that the American people have been through an unbelievably challenging past 4 years, but specifically the past year with this pandemic.
Yeah.
And a lot of people need help right now, whether it's a small business owner or a family who's struggling to make ends meet. We need to make sure everyone in America can get through this pandemic, get back on their feet, and really take our economy back to where it was pre-pandemic. And the second recognition is that we can now actually pass bills that will become law. And that really is something that we had a hard time doing when the Republicans controlled the Senate. Now that it's flipped, we in the House see that there is, in fact, opportunities to take our bills, turn them into law, signed by a Democratic president. And that's very exciting. And we're working very hard to get as much done as we can to help the American people.
Yeah. I guess it sharpens the mind a little bit when you see the consequence, right? It's like,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Ted, I'm curious. I'm curious what's next for you. I've seen your name in some articles that I've read about positions and different things in California. Are you want to break any news for us on the podcast?
I love my job. I was very fortunate that my colleagues elected me to House leadership, and it's exciting to be at the leadership table as we work on bills to help the American people. And life is long, but I like what I'm doing now, and I'm going to keep on doing it as long as my family allows me to do so, and as long as God allows me to do so.
Great. Well said. I guess we're not breaking any news today, Doug.
Yeah, well, this won't be the place where we find out about the Attorney General of California. Hey, Ted, thank you so much for all of your great service, your great work, your spirit, and frankly, your availability. Thanks for saying yes to us here, of course, but also we spend a lot of time paying attention to the news, and I'm really glad that you're in it and that you're out in the news, and you are the face and one of the voices that people can trust and that they can hear if they're paying attention to politics. And so I know that's extra burden for people in your role. That's not, you have your own constituency to think about, and you have leadership responsibilities in the Democratic caucus, and you're also taking on the burden of talking to people and the broader public. And I just want to let you know, we really appreciate it and think it's really important work.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you as well for everything all of you do to really get the faith community engaged and to see that they can make a difference.
Wow, man, that was fun. Hey, I like Ted Liu so much.
Yeah, me too.
A little backstory for those of you that don't know, Ted Liu was our one of our initial sort of yes people who said that vote common good is a good idea. When we first conjured up this idea in late May, early June of 2018, we met with a few people in those early days. Ted was one of them. And we asked him, do you think it would be important if we asked white evangelicals and white Catholics to take on a different voting posture in this election to try to change control of the House of Representatives, to be a blunt to the Trump administration before we got busy trying to remove Donald Trump from office through the election? And he said yes. He thought it would be very great, helped us find locations and places, and has remained a cheerleader, a fundraiser, a participant for us at one of our events, and has been a really great partner and friend in this. So we're big supporters of Ted, and really, really glad to have him be with us. So again, thank you, Ted Liu, for being with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
hey, Rob,
yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No.
Well,
if you have something to say, say it.
No, I was just going to say that one of the things I appreciate so much about Ted is that he feels so genuine to me, even when he. We were kind of chatting about the Cleveland Browns at the beginning, and then we started asking political questions, and you could feel kind of the talking points come up and the formality get in place. And but even when he does that, you can tell that there's an authenticity, that there's a genuineness to him, that he's really in this for the right reason. And we know that from, conversations we've had with him, getting to know him a little bit, but he's one of those people I'm just really glad is in Washington, DC.
Yeah. He's often one of the people, and Katie Porter also from California and some others, that when people say to me, how can you do this work with political people, political politicians and people in politics, they're just in it for, and then, people have these biases against people who run for office. And then you get to know Katie, and you get to know Ted, and you get to know so many of the other people that we've had the privilege of working with. And you realize, no, these are really quality human beings that are giving their very best to this work for reasons that they believe are going to help other people. Is it true that there are politicians who are into it for themselves? Absolutely. Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And on the Democratic side, there's people who are into it for their own well-being. But then there's people who are into it because they really do believe that they have a set of skills, a working set of relationships, and a passion that can be used for the benefit of us all. And Ted is one of those people. So really glad that he was willing to be part of this. Now, having said that, which I think should be the name of my podcast at some point, some other podcast. Having said that, boy, there are some people who fudge around inside the political system that aren't in it for the common good, including lawyer Sidney Powell. So for a little political news, Rob, if we could, just a little rumor mongering, a little scuttlebutting. There was this person who was big in trying to make the argument that the election was fraudulent. Not fraudulent because people were misvoting, not fraudulent because people were saying that they were someone else, which is one of the lies about how people cheat in votes. But she was saying, oh, no, this goes deep. The actual voting machines, the mechanisms that are used to count online and mail-in ballots, those voting machines were intentionally changed to make an outcome that was not the actual voting action of people. So not that you got the wrong people to vote, not that you snuck in a few extras, but that when someone put a vote in, the machine changed that vote to vote for Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. So that was her big argument. This is part of the big lie. Well, she has now been sued.
That's the Kraken. That was going to be released. She was the one who said she was going to release the Kraken.
She was going to release the Kraken. Well, her name is Sidney Powell. She's had a long reputation, a long history of being a lawyer, including for disgraced and criminal national security advisor Michael Flynn, who was a former general and worked in the Obama administration and then was hired by Trump to be the national security director. When he was later criminally prosecuted for lying to the FBI, she was his lawyer. So she's not somebody who's just running around the country and pops up at this point. She's been integrated into the Trump world for the entirety of Trump's presidency and run for the office. Well, she was sued by one of the voting machine companies that
Dominion,
she said, changed the votes. And they sued her for defamation for $1.3 billion. 1.3 billion with a B. With a 0.3 and a B. I mean, a $0.3 billion lawsuit would be a big deal. 1.3. I don't think she has $1.3 billion.
No, I'm just thinking, is she gonna need to get like a side hustle delivering pizza to be able to pay this off if she loses?
For sure, yeah. She's gonna pick up a DoorDash. So if she loses, obviously this is a big deal. She can't pay it. She'd go bankrupt, and she would owe this company forever. So I heard a phrase in the media that there's no truth serum like a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. That'll get you to tell the truth. So her attorneys filed yesterday. This became big news yesterday, and it's making the rounds today on Tuesday, March 23rd, that her lawyer's response, and by the way, no lawyer can make a response on behalf of a client that the client does not agree with. That is a criminal action if they do. So this response from her lawyer is from her. And the argument that lawyers made is that no reasonable person would believe her claims of voter fraud as fact. So when she stood in front of at a press conference, when she filed court documents with many misspelled words and wrong dates and wrong cities, and the statements that she made publicly in press conferences and in the media, specifically as a lawyer representing Donald Trump and then later representing voters that she says were defrauded by these machines. Her argument now is, you cannot find me guilty of defaming Dominion voting machines because what I said was so unreasonable, no one could possibly think that's what I meant. So their argument, I read the long extracts from this, and the argument is when Dominion says what she said about our voting machines is so outrageous that she should be fined, their argument is, no, she shouldn't be fined because what she said was so outrageous, nobody believed it. It didn't actually hurt Dominion because it's so outrageous. So here is a person whose literal words, when you made the joke about she's the one that said we're going to release the Kraken, the people who are behind Stop the Steal, the people who engaged in the insurrection, they were quoting the fact that lawsuits were still in place that were going to overturn the election. It's her lawsuits they're talking about. I had interactions with people in my own friendship group who were saying to me, wait until you see what comes out. and they're referring to her lawsuits. So she was one of the people that stirred up this entire Stop the Steal, that fueled all of this distrust in our country. And then when she's put into the truth serum of a lawsuit and has to file a rebuttal to the court, her lawyers say there's no way what she said should or could have been taken seriously by anyone. Yep. It was taken seriously by people. But this idea, this is so Trumpian, right? I will say something mad, and then when you tell me that it's mad, you're like, well, why would you believe that? Like, could these people have any less respect for their own followers than to say, you believed me? Why would you believe me? That's nutty. How could you believe someone like me? That's your defense? I mean, this is a new level of political, and their argument is, and I'll let you say something about this in a second, then their argument is, this was called political speech. So their argument in this was she shouldn't have been taken seriously. This was in the height of a campaign. It wasn't. It was after a campaign. It was in the height of lawsuits about the outcome of an election. But this was inherently political speech, not legal speech. So that argument is also unbelievable that this would go on. So anyway, that's new in the news. Can't seem to get away from these people, and just glad to have them all literally. And she sat in the White House multiple times making strategic and legal arguments on behalf of the president of the United States. It's unreal.
So that the headline says, Sydney, can you bring back the headline there, producer Dan? Sidney Powell now argues no reasonable person would believe her voter fraud lies were fact. Do you know who believed that her voter fraud lies were fact?
A non-reasonable person named
Donald Trump.
It's just unbelievable.
She is saying that Donald Trump is not a reasonable person because he believes her and still does.
Yes. And still does, and still does. And she believes her. And they all look, the one thing that number of the people who support the Stop the Steal argument, not all of them, some of them have other arguments for Stop the Steal, like it was just, it was fraudulent because voters were who were deceased were then showing up and voting somehow because somebody was voting twice under their names. Some people make that argument. Other than that, there are no arguments, right? It's one or the other. There's a lot of people who buy the Stop the Steal argument who still believe to this day that the voting machines changed. Now, caveat for a minute, or having said that, there are people who believe that 2016 voting machine results were changed away from Hillary Clinton for Donald Trump. I don't believe that, but there's a lot of people I know who are totally against Donald Trump who believe that. This notion that voting machine outcomes are changed by someone getting into the software or into the results part of the software and changing the outcome, that's actually believed. But when someone who makes that claim, whether it's about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, when that claim is made and it's having to be supported in a court of law in a lawsuit, the only thing lawyers can say is no reasonable person could believe that that's what happened because there's no proof. It's not possible. That's not how it goes. Now, are there people who might be listening to this right now and are saying, oh no, it's possible. I did my own research. Absolutely. So I don't know what to do about that mismatch between people on every side of the aisle. Like people who believe that voter fraud is a real thing often don't believe that voter fraud is a real thing because wrong people voted. They believe voter fraud is a thing because someone's changing the outcomes. No, sometimes machines, sometimes people. But this is a big question beyond the ridiculousness that is Sidney Powell and the entire crowd that is the legal team of Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, and I would just say that if you are one of those people who still believes that this took place, understand that your whole argument is based on trusting Sidney Powell. And Sidney Powell is now saying that you, as someone who believes this, are not a reasonable person. So are you going to trust her about that? Or are you going to trust her about what she said about the voting machines? Because she's contradicting herself. Which way are you going to go? Either you believe her or you are an unreasonable person.
Oh boy, that was cathartic.
Whew.
Hey, on the
Yeah.
back on the Ted Liu side to get us out of Sidney Powell. Sorry to drag us down that road. One of the great things I thought that phrases that Ted made. I was about to say one of the things that Ted said, and then I thought that was too rhymey, is when he said, "I think that good policy is good campaigning," or some phrase like that. That's an excellent notion for Democrats to pursue for the next year and a half for the election that's going to be coming on November 2nd, 2022. Do your jobs, do them well, pass some bills, fix some things, get out there, sell it like you mean it, like govern like you believe what you're doing. Something that hasn't happened in our government in a long time. We haven't passed a lot of bills, been a lot of executive orders. It's been a lot of work from the presidential vantage point, from the executive branch, from the cabinets, a lot of that work, which is important work. You're supposed to do that. But our laws are not made by the president. Our laws are signed by the president when Congress has passed those laws. So what we need is better laws. Like, look, I would love to have a country that has laws and follows them. When people talk about the border, which we're going to be talking about a lot with Vote Common Good over the next few months, when they talk about the border, and yeah, we have to be compassionate, but we also have to be a country of laws. Well, technically, I think we need to be a country of fair laws, safe laws, just laws, lawful laws, not just random laws passed in order to make some other point. And oftentimes laws are being used to challenge other laws. Like, just so we all know, the way our legal system works is a law has to exist. Somebody has to be harmed by that law. Then that law can be challenged because it's created some harm. So sometimes laws are passed in order to then later be changed. Case in point, in the state of Arkansas, they have passed some recent anti-abortion laws, and the governor from the state that you live in, Rob, Governor Asa Hutchinson, was on with the news shows on Sunday, and I watched him, and the question was asked, when you pass this law that restricts abortion for every situation other than the health or safety of the mother, that violates the stated Supreme Court ruling of Roe versus Wade. Did you know that? And is that why you passed the law? And he said, yes, that's exactly why we passed the law. We passed a law that we know is unlawful so we can challenge the lawful law. Okay. Now, some people will call that just brazen politics, but that's actually the way you're going to challenge laws, right? So what we need to do is not just throw up our hands and say to ourselves, we have to be a country of laws. No, what we have to do is actually pass laws that are good, that are effective, that are just, and that create a sense of common good. And until we do that, to say we just have to be a country that follows our laws misses the entire point of the law, right? So this is why having laws passed by Congress matters. And what those laws are that are passed by Congress. This is why Congress cannot continue to pass the buck instead of passing a law. Because what we have to have is not executive orders and not actions by the different departments under the executive branch. What we need is laws that people know and then can challenge, and then we can name them as just or unjust, fair or unfair, common good or not common good. And every time Congress continues to say, sends us that little emoji with the hands up, the palms up in the air, and like, nothing I can do about it. Sorry, you're literally the only people. You 538 people are the ones who can make laws. Yeah, this is what you need to do, and this is what Congress needs to do, and this is what Ted Liu, I think, was getting at.
Yeah, and one of the things that I absolutely love, and thinking about that idea that good lawmaking is good campaigning, it's good policy is good politics. So many things that Democrats should be supporting are tremendously popular with the American public, whether it is passing background checks and passing common sense reforms that will deal with gun violence in America, whether it's increasing the minimum wage, the fight for 15. We've seen that as a result of the American Rescue Plan and other stimulus things that, universal basic income is becoming tremendously popular with the American public. Healthcare, dealing with healthcare costs and making sure that Americans have the health coverage they need, tremendously popular with the American public. I mean, there's so many issues on down the list that if Democrats would simply address these things, they would be so tremendously popular. And they have a golden opportunity to build on their majorities in the House and their very slight majority in the Senate headed into the midterms that I am, as I said to Ted, I'm on the ledge about, I'm terrified about. But if we see bold leadership from the Democrats in actually doing something, and here's the challenge. As soon as you pass these laws, you give up the political football. Like you no longer have an issue to fundraise about, campaign on, and then you've got to move on to something else. And there's a lot of folks who make that calculation that we would rather have this issue than to have it solved. Yes. But if Democrats solve these problems by passing these tremendously popular positions that are also good policy, they're looking at a generational majority as a result of that. The numbers are already going in their direction. If they, the flywheel is moving, this is their chance to really shove it and get it going on its own. And we'll see if they're able to do that.
Yeah, I really hope so. And this issue you raised, where once you pass a law, you now remove the promise of passing that law from your campaign rhetoric, right? This old phrase that shows up in our society, "What have you done for me lately?" is a really important notion in our society, right? That exists as a phrase because it's true. And people often feel like, as a candidate, it would be better to say, things aren't the way we want them. If you elect me or re-elect me, then we will make that change. As opposed to, things weren't the way you wanted them. You elected me. We made that change. Then the next question is, what will you do next? Now, a smart way to lay out your politics in relationship to your constituents is to have a long list that's more than a couple of issues. Mm-hmm. One of the problems that both major political parties have, and that every one of the non-major parties have, is they tend to fixate or focus on one or two or three issues publicly. Now, clearly they're working on more things, but very often they get tied so deeply to only a few that this notion that you raise, that if it gets solved, if immigration or infrastructure or the economy or taxes, any of these get solved, or gun violence, are addressed at the legislative level, then what do we have to argue about, right? So there's a very tantalizing temptation for people in politics to be champions of an issue, but keep it alive as an issue. Yep. And I think the best bet, and maybe we're in a moment where effective, good, just laws that people can feel good about, or at least the majority or super majority of people in this country can feel good about, is the best way forward. Wouldn't that be great?
That would be great.
This is Common Good Politics around here. For an hour on Tuesday mornings, we like to chat with you about politics and what the common good would mean. And then on Wednesdays, an hour earlier at 9 a.m. Central Time, and then do your own math, we talk about faith with a couple of pastors, 4 of us actually. So I'd love to have you join us tomorrow morning. On Thursdays, we talk about big issues that are coming. Ani Zonneveld from Muslims for Progressive Values is going to be a guest on Wednesday. Her and I have written an op-ed together that says that religious leaders from the evangelical tradition need to take as seriously the radicalization of their members as Muslim leaders were called to do in the early 2000s. So Ani and I from Muslim for Progressive Values, and me from Vote Common Good, we're joining together with an op-ed that'll come out on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about that on Thursday. So that's our Thursday issues conversation. And then on Friday, what's becoming the Vote Common Good economist is going to be here, and we're going to talk
I
a
love
little
it.
bit about economy. So a full week, Monday through Friday, your common good dose. It's like a vaccine for political selfishness. Right, delivered right here, a shot in the arm, as they say it, a real booster shot of common good. So, Rob, nice to see you. Thanks for chatting today. Again, thanks to Ted Liu. Thank you, producer Dan, for covering all of us on this, and we will see you all tomorrow morning.